Hi, my name is Lucette Davies. This video is a presentation that I gave to the Eastbourne People's Assembly on the NHS. The presentation aimed to explain the political changes that are causing the current crisis in the NHS. It also aimed to give anyone the facts they need to start campaigning for our NHS. I hope it will also inspire people to campaign. I am passionate about protecting the NHS. So first I want to explain why I feel so strongly about it. There is something in my family history that I always think of when I'm not sure whether I've got the energy to campaign. It goes back to the 1930s, after my dad and his sister had left home. Their mum, my grandma, was a nurse and a midwife, but also a war widow and really very poor. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1938. She had the money to pay for the diagnosis, but not for the treatment. There was no NHS and no social services. So she found herself one day at a bus stop where a group of kids were laughing at her and moving away. She was a very proud woman and realised with horror that she must smell very badly, as she really couldn't care for herself any longer. She went home, put her affairs in order and gassed herself with the fumes from a coal fire. There were probably many other people who suffered and died because of not having access to healthcare. This is why we built up the NHS, and it's why we must now fight for it. Here's just some facts about things that are happening in our NHS now. We're seeing it a lot on the news, in our papers. We know there's a problem. You can't deny it. But what we're not hearing enough of is why it's happening. But thanks to the amazing people who work in our NHS, it is still doing a fantastic job and it is still admired around the world. Our NHS is not failing. It is being failed by our government. So why campaign? Is there any point, or have things gone too far already? I really believe an NHS campaign has a good chance of success if we're armed with the facts. Our lives depend on healthcare provision and nothing can be more important than this. I really truly believe that a government can be judged on how well it treats the vulnerable in its society, how well it can care for the people who've hit on hard times. And you can't argue about it because sick people are vulnerable. So I think that's enough reason for me. Anyway, so NHS is really truly socialist to its core. It was set up with the idea that the burden of ill health should be shared across the whole population, with those with the greatest means paying the most. Every person in the country had the same entitlement to every treatment as every other, and the population cherish it. I really do believe we do. So why is it in crisis if we all cherish it so much? So those on the right and those on the left, nearly everyone in our population cherish the NHS. The rest of the world still envy the health service we have. We are the owners of this NHS, and surely the fact that the population holds the service dear should be enough to protect it. In the words of Nye Bevan, the NHS will last as long as there are enough folk left with the faith to fight for it. I don't know if there's enough folk left with the faith to fight for it right now, but we need to get out there and give them the faith to fight for it. So it's got to be positive. You've got to actually say we can do this, because otherwise people will just fall into despair and they'll give up. And that's the last thing we need. Our NHS is fighting for our lives. It's now time we fought for its life. Just think about my story and my grandma. Think about the many, many other people who went through a nightmare scenario before the NHS. And then just think, do I want to fight for it? Because if you think about the past, then surely that's enough reason. So why a mythbuster? I think there are a number of myths that circulate in our communities that get in the way of people who campaign for a better NHS. I've been out on the streets sometimes with various campaigns for the NHS. I think generally just about everybody you speak to is positive about the NHS and keen to support it. But there's a lot of things that they say sometimes that get in the way. And I think you need to know the facts. You need to actually be able to challenge those myths. So that's why a mythbuster. We live in the post-truth era, with politicians gaining support for policies by using emotive statements that have no basis in reality. And our government has used emotive statements and lies to justify their plans to dismantle our health service. So, myth number one, we can't afford our NHS in the current political climate. Yeah, the country's economy is not great at the moment, but you know, after the war, Britain was really, really far worse off and in much more debt. But we managed to set up the NHS, we managed to set up social services, we built a load of council housing, we rebuilt a lot of the infrastructure of the country, we did it all. And the country benefited from that. We're still benefiting today. So here's Nye Bevan. He took Britain out of a situation where ill health was the norm for many and death came too soon. But he used the NHS system because there was bucket loads of evidence that showed that an NHS, a health service that is paid for and provided by one single body, will be the most efficient. And by giving everyone the same entitlement to healthcare, bureaucracy is reduced and the system is fair for all. And so it's really, really was a very efficient service. Healthcare costs, however it's delivered. So why not choose the most efficient system we know of? And before the introduction of the NHS, Britain wasn't a healthy country. When people are sick or when people are caring for sick relatives, they either can't work or they can't work as well. It really makes good economic sense. There's also a very strong moral argument for the NHS. The right to healthcare is written into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's human rights, not just the rights of some people. So myth number two, you can't trust any political party with the NHS. Actually, in some ways, it's not a myth, because actually they've all screwed up at times. But we can make sure they start becoming trustworthy with our healthcare. We've just got to have our voices heard. Green, left, right, in the middle. Somebody will have the power to protect or destroy the NHS. All our politicians have failed the NHS in some way, but we've let them. Yeah, the various NHS acts of Parliament have been really long, complicated and full of legal jargon. Yeah, perhaps we're entitled to leave it up to our politicians to take care of. I mean, that's what we elect them to do. But clearly now we should be able to see that doing this means our health service is steadily eroded. This presentation will aim to try and make sense of what's been going on politically, to give us the facts so we can campaign effectively. Catalogue of errors. I could have written a lot more than this on the catalogue of errors, but I really started with Maggie. Although she said that she would never dare touch the NHS for fear of a public outcry. But John Major started allowing private companies access into our healthcare system, and this was expanded by Tony Blair. Hospitals were able to contract out services such as cleaning and portering. PFI deals were heralded as bringing the efficiency of the private sector into the healthcare system. And NHS services were eventually placed into trusts and run under a business model where they became responsible for their own finances. That's actually for foundation trusts only, but nearly all of them are foundation trusts now. Labour opened the door for the largest restructuring of the NHS under David Cameron, while the Lib Dems held that door firmly open. I think it's a defeatist argument to say that, you can't trust any politician with the NHS, because anyone in government has the power to protect the NHS. If we make our voices heard, we're really loud, we want an NHS, we want the NHS, that we pay for and we once had, then I actually think we can have the power to influence them. Once politicians start actually thinking that they're going to lose your vote, they suddenly become a little bit more amenable to listening to you. So use that one. Myth number 3, doesn't matter who provides healthcare as long as it's free at the point of use. Well, actually it does. I've called it the biggest fallacy known to man, but it does matter. So here's why. Healthcare, as I've already said, it's at its most efficient when provided and funded by one single body. At the moment, we've now got quite a lot of different bodies involved in our healthcare system, and the service is really fragmented. You've got one department that doesn't know what another's doing or won't communicate with another. Decisions about healthcare made by private organisations will be determined by profit first instead of health first. They're not in it for the love. They're in it to make money. If a private corporation develops a new treatment, that new treatment may be seen as a trade secret. That's ridiculous. If a hospital starts doing a good job, they can't tell another hospital. Yeah. If private organisations run a service in a teaching hospital, student doctors and junior doctors may never learn about that service. I think there was a case of a hospital in London where cataract removals were taken over by a private company. That private company then decided that they didn't want student doctors doing the cataract operation. So those student doctors never learnt about that service. Yeah, that's not a good thing. I also went to a meeting some time ago, shortly after the introduction of the Health and Social Care Act, which is what has really fragmented our NHS. And they involved Sean Linton, and he's the journalist who uncovered the mid-staffs crisis. And he was quite clear. He used a lots and lots of FOI, Freedom of Information requests, to get the information he needed to uncover what was going on. Sadly, at times it's absolutely essential for a journalist to uncover wrongdoings. That's why we have FOI. But only public sector bodies are subject to Freedom of Information requests. When you start having private organisations involved in healthcare and private hospitals, then if there's wrongdoings, if there's failings, a journalist can't uncover it because they can't use Freedom of Information requests. And to be honest, that is quite a serious problem. It's getting overlooked currently. I think money corrupts. You see a lot of the big corporations involved in our society. I mean, I don't think our rail service is more efficient than British Rail. Why do we get fleeced by our fuel providers? We do get fleeced. We get fleeced by our water companies. I mean, the actions of our banks are quite disgusting. And I don't really think that we get a great choice from our retail companies. Money corrupts. Start letting private sector into the NHS and it gets corrupted. I really truly believe that.
And on the line with us is Dr. Bob Gill.
He's
a family physician in the United
And
Kingdom
I think that this guy is talking to an English doctor, and it really, I thought, highlighted some of the problems of privatisation.
The Great
So it's worth
NHS
watch.
Heist Sell-Off. The website is thegreatnhsheist.com, and for the film. And the National Action Health Action Party that's fighting to save the NHS is the website is nhap.org. You can tweet Dr. Gill at Dr. DRBOBGILL, as in Dr. Bob Gill. Dr. Gill, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for being with us. So to start at the beginning, most Americans are not familiar with the differences between the British National Health Service and some of the other European single-payer systems, or the hybrid systems, or system that they have in Switzerland, or is certainly, you know, how it is here in the United States. You want to give us a 1 or 2 minute summary of what the NHS is and does?
Well, the NHS, when it was set up in 1948, was designed as a very simple structure which was funded through taxation and delivered by doctors and nurses employed by the taxpayer. So everything was funded by taxation and provided through hospitals which were owned by the public and delivered by public servants. A very simple system.
Right, and this is what you would call socialized medicine, as opposed to single payer, where you've socialized the payment system, but you can privatize the doctors and hospitals and things like that, correct?
Yeah, socialized system. The systems in Europe are a little bit of a hybrid, where you've got private providers and some private insurers. But the NHS, when it was developed in 1948, was a pure public service.
Right. And in the years since then, what has happened, and what is this? What is the Great Heist? Tell us about your movie, your documentary.
Well, essentially what's been going on over the last 2 decades has been a very complex and stealth deception. And this has been carried out by consecutive governments. The main factor about this heist is that most people don't know it's taking place. Now, that is critical to the success of the heist, to make sure that the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the public, the taxpayers do not realize that their precious and respected health system is being systematically converted and prepared for an insurance industry takeover, and the people taking it over are going to be American health insurers like United Health, Kaiser Permanente. These organizations are behind the scenes setting the system up for their takeover.
Whoa. That's amazing. So at the same time that the United States has a strong pressure to basically scale back, if not destroy some of these, I call them banksters, because they don't actually cure anybody of any illness or diagnose or give vaccines or anything. They just handle money. These so-called health insurance companies, they're trying to go worldwide. They're trying to go into the UK. I'm surprised this actually didn't start under Maggie Thatcher, or did it?
It did start under Maggie Thatcher. In fact, the plans were written in the 1980s. There was a report by the Adam Smith Institute called The Health of Nations, which outlined how to get from a socialized system to an insurance system. Another paper in 1988, written by Oliver Letwin, who was employed by N.M. Rothschild's privatization unit. He produced a paper called Britain's Biggest Enterprise, which again set out how to go by stepwise sequential progress to an insurance-based system. Now we have at the head of the NHS, now you might not believe this, a guy called Simon Stevens. Now Simon Stevens was president of United Health's global division, and he spent 10 years at United Health as a senior executive, and he's running the show.
Wow. And United Healthcare, this is the company that Stephen J. Hemsley is the CEO of, who has taken over $1 billion in compensation. His predecessor, who is referred to as Dollar Bill McGuire, took over $1.6 billion of compensation, got busted for fraud, had to give back a couple $100 million, or busted for some sort of impropriety. This is a company that is, at least among people who know anything about it in the United States, very controversial. On the other hand, they basically own the Medicare Advantage market in the United States, because their front group, the AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, gets most of their revenue from selling these so-called Medicare Advantage programs, which take people out of the Medicare program and put them into, a privatized system that sort of looks like Medicare. People think they still have Medicare. These people really know what they're doing. They know how to game the system and how to fool people. How are they doing it in the UK?
Well, they've basically bought our politicians. They certainly dominate the media narrative. Most of the public, indeed most of the professionals who work in our health system, haven't got a clue, and that's the purpose of our film. It's a real desperate wake-up call, and that's why we're producing this film. We've got a GoFundMe site, GoFundMe the Great NHS Heist, and we're trying to get the message out there loud and clear that despite all the disinformation that we are subjected to, our health service is on the brink of complete corporate takeover. You mentioned United Health. We've been over in the States. We've interviewed people like Wendell Potter. We've interviewed the founders of the Physicians for a National Health Program, Drs. Woolhandler and Himmelstein, and we've learned how fraud is endemic in the private system. the insurers will always be one step ahead of the legislation. In fact, oftentimes the revolving door ensures that the insurers themselves write the policy for government. We know that Simon Stevens, the name I mentioned earlier, before he came back to the NHS, he actively campaigned against the public option in Obamacare, and he also campaigned for the inclusion of healthcare into TTIP, the trade deal that's been abandoned recently.
It's amazing. It's like anything that can be done good by government, if you can get government out of the way, it presents an opportunity for billionaires to make more money, skimming it off the top of the public. How is the NHS doing, by the way, in Great Britain?
The NHS is now in the phase of defunding. A famous quote from Noam Chomsky talked about defunding prior to handing it over to private capital. So we're in the phase of gradual restriction of funding. The service is being made to look bad. There are bad headlines in the papers all the time, on the media. Public confidence is being deliberately eroded. The health professionals don't have the resources to do a good job, so they're losing faith in the system. So you have this very cleverly thought out propaganda tactics, funding squeeze, and the solution will be let's ask our American friends to help us out.
They're doing the exact same thing here. The strategy was laid out during the Reagan administration. David Stockman coined the phrase "starve the beast." He wrote a book later apologizing for it. But basically, you look at a system that is working well, Social Security, Medicare, something like that. You look at a government program that's working well. You dial back its funding to the point where it's no longer working well, where there are long wait times, people are frustrated on the telephone, et cetera, et cetera. It's happened with the IRS, for that matter. You damage the program, and then you point at it and say, look, the program's damaged. We have a solution. Let's turn it over to, billionaire A or billionaire B.
That's exactly the formula they use. It's very successful. They're using it again. But fundamentally, what we have is a horde of parasites who we don't need to run a health system. You don't need insurers. You don't need managers to the extent that we're getting them now. I understand in the American system from the 1970s to the present day, the increase in management and administration went up 30-fold in the health system. In that same time, the increase in health professionals only went up 2-fold. And we've had that same disease being infesting the NHS. So we do know that that's how it works. They have to make it look bad. They have to restrict the funding. And we know that when you have the profit motive in healthcare, it doesn't work like any other market. You have what's called information asymmetry, where the patient is not a consumer because he doesn't have the full information. Right. And you also have something called provider-led demand, whereby you have a perverse incentive for the providers to overcharge you, to overdiagnose, to overmedicate. And we know that leads to patient harm. So we're on a trajectory to be spending a lot more money, either directly through taxation or directly out of our pocket. The total cost will more than double. The healthcare will get worse. And our public just aren't aware of this. Amazing.
Dr. Bob Gill, family physician in the United Kingdom, documentary filmmaker, The Great NHS Heist Sell-Off, the website, thegreatnhsheist.com, and you have your GoFundMe page again is?
It's GoFundMe, and it's The Great NHS Heist.
Good. Very straightforward. Dr. Gill, I wish you the very best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll be back.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great video. It's quite informative. It's a bit scary as well. I mean, I've seen pictures of the health lobbying companies, corporations in London. Their buildings, they're not in cheap areas. Their buildings are quite extravagant. There's lots of money going into health lobbying. We need to make sure that our government listens to the people and not to those private companies lobbying them, really with the interests of large corporations at heart. I think you also need to remember that the American healthcare system it's they spend twice as much per capita as we do on healthcare, and their system is half as efficient. And I think really that's all you need to know to say that we don't want that in our country. So myth number 4, PFI initiatives are bad, must go. So private finance initiatives, publicate them. They are simply where hospitals are rebuilt or wards are added to a hospital, where private money is borrowed by the NHS to build those hospitals, and sometimes as contract, a private provider will actually sort out all the maintenance of the building and running of it for 30 odd years or something. I think they've become very, very unpopular with the public, and generally they've ended up as being a very expensive way of buying a hospital or building a hospital. The truth is a little bit sort of not quite so black and white. So, good, bad and ugly of PFI. It is an issue that the public actually don't want them. I don't know, the truth is a little ambiguous. Getting rid of PFI deals that we've already got may not save any money centrally. If PFI deals are terminated, then those trusts that had the PFI deal will then be more appealing for private companies to take over. Hospital trusts who don't have a PFI deal pay a capital charge to the Treasury for use of the buildings. If PFI deals were terminated, those trusts that left with capital charges will be unfairly disadvantaged in a financial sense. I think Peterborough Hospital was the worst example of a bad PFI deal. They felt that if they built a load of extra wards and borrowed the money to do so, they would get more people using the hospital, get more money, and it would pay it back. But in fact, it's miserably failed. They're left with, they didn't get more patients. So at the moment, they get about 10 to 20 million every year by the Department of Health just to pay off the PFI. So that wasn't good. John Major started off with using PFI deals, but in the 1997, when the Labour Party came to power, the public sector infrastructure was crumbling. It was schools, it was hospitals, it was everything. And Gordon Brown used PFI quite a lot to build new hospitals and wards without creating a massive hole in the Treasury's purse. If the private sector was carrying the risk of those loans, then if those loans went sour and money wasn't repaid, the private sector would be allowed to go bankrupt or lose out. We don't do that in the NHS. So like with Peterborough, they presented a bad plan to get the money. The lender lent money on a bad plan. In the private sector, normally both would lose out, but not in the NHS. We just keep paying, and so we're actually paying to keep the hospital going. We're paying so that the private sector lender didn't lose out. There are good examples as well. Central Manchester hospitals used PFI to close down 4 hospitals and create one central hospital with all services. The plan was a real success, and the PFI deal created no problems. I suppose it needs looking at hospital by hospital. It doesn't seem that we can have just one strategy for all hospitals. And we do need to bear in mind that once we get rid of PFI, then the private sector takeover becomes that bit more likely. So, myth number 6, health tourism and high immigration is crippling the NHS. I think this has become an argument that's very much in the headlines since the EU referendum. And I'm not saying that everybody who believes this is racist, but I think there is some racist bigotry goes on. And there are some people that believe it's common sense, but actually I think it's, again, somewhere in between. So, racist bigotry or common sense? I think there's the facts that need to look at. Deliberate health tourism is when somebody, a foreign national, comes to the UK simply to use our NHS. They reckon that costs around 110 million to 280 million a year, and that's out of a total NHS budget of 118 billion. So actually that's around 0.6% of funding we would save if actually we could stop it completely. At the moment, people have to prove that they are residents in the UK to be entitled to NHS treatment. And some hospitals are asking people to show a passport and or utility bills. And I don't know where that leaves the homeless. I know soon we are going to restrict NHS treatment to those who have an indefinite leave to remain in the UK. So where does that leave asylum seekers and refugees? I'm not sure it's right that we should be expecting our hospitals, our doctors and our nurses to be acting as a border force. I've already said that the right to healthcare is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And where's the morality in leaving a sick person without care because they can't afford to pay up front? We are actually already doing that. Foreign nationals are actually being asked to pay up front for care, although we'll be denied it, and I'm not sure that's very full of morals. It's quite horrid, actually, in my mind. I think part of the problem is that we're extraordinarily bad at claiming back money we're owed. We don't have to be bad at it. We could get better at it. I think there's an issue which will mean that when we start, not wanting to treat people who are not entitled to our NHS, coloured people are going to become under more suspicion than white people. The biggest case of health tourism is actually from our own people, the expats who return to the UK to use NHS services. That's the most common form. Yeah. The NHS, however, relies heavily on foreign nationals as workers. Yeah, there's some great guys. I think at the recent NHS march in London, Jeremy Corbyn was talking about having visited somebody in hospital, and he said 20 different nationalities were involved in giving him care. Yeah, everybody knows we've got a lot of foreign nationals in our NHS. There's some graphs. The one on the left is where doctors in the UK qualified. The black line being the UK. The green line is the rest of the world. And the blue line is the EEA and Switzerland. Similar story for nurses. I think looks like we get more nurses from England than we do doctors from England. I think it's worth remembering we've got a lot of foreign nationals working, giving us care. It's a valid argument to say that the cost of training health professionals is high, and it's right, actually, not for us to be sapping poorer countries the health professionals they pay to train. But our NHS workforce is reporting really low morale and high degrees of work-related stress, and many are leaving to live abroad. European nursing staff registering in the UK has fallen by 90% since the EU referendum. The ending of bursaries for student nurses has resulted in a 23% reduction in the numbers applying for nursing degrees. It would take 10 years or more to train a GP or consultant doctor in the UK, and so we just can't afford to be getting rid of all our immigrant workers from our NHS yet. At the moment, if a migrant worker is earning less than 30,000 after 5 years in the UK, they'll also be sent home, and that would apply to every migrant nurse we have. Right, next myth, then the NHS must be 100% publicly owned. In some way I agree, but our NHS has always contracted work out to non-publicly owned bodies, including the independent sector, charities, social enterprises and mutuals. There's no reason why our NHS cannot be an efficient and good healthcare system while contracting out some work to non-publicly owned bodies. I think we just need to be aware of the dangers of privatisation. I don't think we should be contracting out work to non-NHS bodies unless we have to. I think sometimes there's a logic behind it where actually it is a good idea to contract out work. It's just really being aware of all the horrors of privatisation in the NHS. We also need to be aware that our hospitals are public assets, and we've just got to stop selling off our public assets, because once they're gone, they're gone. So where are we up to now, and how can it all come right again? There's just some facts about our NHS. 1 million patients every 36 hours, the largest employer in the country. Yeah, but at the end of September 2016, there were 3,703 million patients on waiting lists. But as I said, it's not failing, it's being failed. It's still the envy of many countries. I think the NHS is not failing because, and that's down to the fantastic people who work there. They can't keep on and on doing a fantastic job when they're not supported by the government. At some point, and we're starting to see fault lines appear, and we're starting to get reports in the media saying the NHS has got people dying on trolleys in hospital corridors. This is not good, and we need to never forget the mental health is part of the NHS, and it's always been the Cinderella service, and it is getting more so. It is actually falling further and further behind general health all the time. And we keep hearing about kids with mental illness being sent hundreds of miles away from home for treatment. That sort of thing is just not okay. So how have we got to this point? So we had the Health and Social Care Act of 2012. The one that we were promised wouldn't happen. David Cameron got elected on the promise that there would be no more top-down reorganisations. And then as soon as he was elected, he set about putting the biggest ever reorganisation into play. The first thing was that the number of places for student doctors, nurses and other health professionals in universities and colleges was reduced by 20%. So we're starting to see the effect of that, where the numbers who normally were coming through universities and colleges to work in our NHS are falling. So that started in 2010. Obviously then we've got fewer health professionals. He sort of heralded it as cutting bureaucracy and streamlining the service. That's a bit of a diagram of all the various different bodies now involved in our NHS. The two shaded boxes, which is primary care trusts and strategic health authorities, they existed before this streamlining. All the others were created since, and I don't think that looks streamlined. So what's been the effect? We've become burdened with huge and complicated bureaucracy, and the NHS is now built on a business model where the focus on every decision is financial and not necessarily on giving good health outcomes. I mean, hospitals are being closed, departments are being closed, services changed against the advice of the people who know about health, and that's the doctors and the healthcare professionals. So yeah, it's also become really hugely fragmented. The number of long waiters for NHS treatment has increased significantly since 2012. We call a long waiter a person who's been waiting over 18 weeks for NHS treatment. Yeah, you can see in England that's up 163%. Northern Ireland 95%, Scotland 82%, and Wales 74%. How on earth did he get away with this? Yeah, well, a level of deceit was brought in to quell the voices of concerned members of the public, concerned health professionals, and so on. They used a carrot and stick technique to achieve the cooperation of royal colleges. the bill was like really overly complex. It used a lot of unnecessarily legal jargon to obfuscate its whole meaning. I think what was horrid was Shirley Williams, who'd once described the bill as stealth privatisation. She ended up signing a letter along with Nick Clegg, and they sent it to every Lib Dem MP, because really the Tories couldn't get this bill through without the support of the Lib Dems. This letter was to reassure them that all the various issues they were concerned about, there were going to be safeguards put in place to avoid those issues happening. And it was just like a complete work of fiction. It was disgusting, really. So what does all this mean for us? It means our Secretary of State, Jeremy Hunt, no longer has a duty to provide and secure comprehensive healthcare for all. He's only got a duty to promote it. Healthcare provision is determined by market forces, not by need. So if the market forces say that, oh, there's no point actually providing that service, it won't matter that in that area that service is needed. And our Secretary of State for Health can no longer be responsible or held accountable for failings of the NHS. Yeah, this isn't good. I mean, Jeremy Hunt co-authored a book which actually described the NHS as not fit for purpose in the 21st century, and actually talked about how we could go about dismantling the whole thing. And he's in charge now. So, other stresses on our NHS. I think it's been a victim of its own success. We've introduced more and more treatments, more expensive treatments, and we as the public have come to expect that the healthcare needs are addressed. People are living longer and the population is growing, although this does mean we have more people paying taxes to fund the NHS. So problems produced is, I've already said, it's hugely fragmented. We've got private sector cherry picking off the most profitable services and leaving the NHS to run the financially riskier services. And when a service is put out to tender, it will be put out to tender at every new financial year. And those people working for that service, they will know that should that service be awarded to another provider, they may not have a job, or they may not have the same salary, or they may not have the same working conditions if they go to the new provider. So they're living with permanent job insecurity, and these are the people that care for our lives. Bureaucracy in the NHS has increased. We've also got the increased number of people living in poverty now, and they're likely to have poorer health. And we're also cutting social services, which means people are left in hospitals when they're well enough to leave, and others will need hospital care because of a lack of care at home. So what's happening right now? Right, we've been for the last few years just giving our NHS an increase in funding of 1%. It actually needs 4% to carry on doing the same as it was, to keep on doing it. So basically we're running trusts into deficits because they're having to spend more than we're giving them each and every year. And we need to be aware of trade deals. As we approach Brexit, then Britain will be trying to forge new trade deals. I think America and Canada are probably two inevitable ones. I think the American corporations are desperate to get into our NHS. They've bled America dry and they want to come and do the same to us. When we're starting a trade deal, say with America, we then have corporate courts set up and we can have investor-state dispute settlements. So that's when a private investor, say like a healthcare corporation, they've got the right to come into the UK and run parts of our NHS. If our state, our government puts in regulations that they feel limit their capacity to make profit, they can take us to court and sue the government. But if in the future our government seeks to return our NHS to being a state-run services, then the corporations could sue the government again say, well, actually, if you turn it into a state-run service, we can't come in and make loads and loads of money, so, we're going to sue you. That facility of the investor-state dispute settlement, that would actually continue for 20 years, even if we ended any trade deals. So, say we have another government comes in and wants to end the trade deal with America, then we could have American healthcare corporations still suing our government for the next 20 years. Yeah, they're scary. So, right, NHS England was a new body that was created to oversee all services. They asked for more money, not much more, they didn't get it. They've come up with the sustainability and transformation plans. There's a reason they've been nicknamed Slash, Trash and Privatise. And that's really what they intend to do. They're trying to make sure that each NHS trust absorbs its deficit by 2020. So basically they've got to cut services, they've got to close hospitals, they've got to, reduce what we get out. And they may privatise things as well. So the plans are drawn up by Sustainability and Transformation Plan Boards, STP boards. They're unelected officials. And I think I went to a meeting at Brighton and they were saying that the possibility of an STP board would be allowed to, without any debate in Parliament or at local council level, change regulations that govern local authorities, like children's services and so on. It's so against our constitution, it's scary. Yeah, Slash, Trash and Privatise. We've already had Bob Gill talking about this. So they slash the funding, they trash the services, point out all the failures, using the media to also help point out failures, and then bingo, present privatisation as a solution. Maggie did it when she privatised our railways. How would you feel if you had to approach an organisation as badly run as Southern Rail for your healthcare? I think that says it all, really.
Pro tip, if you're trying to make sense of this crazy world we live in, next time you come across a really boring sounding acronym, keep it OBR, DNC, there is an at least 70% chance that it's actually secret evil. So let's talk about STPs. Not STDs. If you're old enough to watch Austerity Blows, you're old enough to already know where you stand on them. STPs. Sustainability and Transformation Plans. Because let's face it, calling them secret privatisation plans might have set some tongues wagging. Apparently, this latest top-down reorganisation of the NHS, which nobody voted for, is going to be amazing. By rearranging services into 44 footprints, STPs will get acute and social services to work better together than ever before, split the atom and find a cure for the common cold. What's not to like? But reading between the lines, STP's primary function seems to be implementing £22 billion worth of cuts. Because we have a government that would rather spend money bombing what's left of Syria and making banks feel okay than on, health and wellness of actual humans. To be honest, the why is pretty obvious. It's the how where things get really dicey. So a survey done by the Health Service Journal found that a third of these plans include downgrading or closing emergency departments. Almost half seek to cut hospital beds because we just have far too many of those. More than half plan to close or downgrade community hospitals, and 1 in 5 also want to cut acute service staffing. That is one way to reduce the 28,000 unfilled nursing posts in NHS England, I suppose. Beyond taking a knife to overstretched, underfunded services, STPs will be a mechanism for asset stripping what's left. And by asset stripping, I mean flogging off land and buildings for luxury flats and giving over massive chunks of services to private companies. I don't want to be a drama queen about this, but if you've ever wondered what the destruction of the NHS would look like, this is it. And if you still don't think this is remotely shady, the entire project is being stewarded by our old friend Jeremy Hunt and a man named Simon Stevens, the head of NHS England, whose reason for being seems to be to do the bidding of his former employers, United Health, who sound like they might be nice, but actually they're the largest private health and medical insurance company in the world. Capiche? So, what can we do? Well, first of all, I'm going to dump some links in the description box below so that you can go and get yourself informed on STPs. Second, don't be a loner. Find your local NHS campaign group. If there isn't one, set one up. If it sounds like effort, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But what are you going to do when your grandchildren ask you about that time that we used to have an NHS? Just say, sorry kids, I was just preoccupied with the injustice that is X Factor 2016. I'm just trying to save you from future embarrassment. Third, local councils are about the only democratically accountable people involved in this entire shady process. They have to sign off on STPs. Get onto your councillors. Demand to know what's in your STP. If, as I suspect will be the case, your STP is being used as a smokescreen for cuts and privatisation, councillors need to reject them. Now, in my experience, councillors have a tendency to get a bit uppity every time they're asked to just not pass on savage austerity measures. But they have a choice. In fact, 2 councils in West London have already refused to comply, thanks in no small part to local NHS campaigners who have refused to allow them to turn a blind eye and accept that there is no alternative mantra. Finally, even without STPs, the NHS would still be facing cuts, closures and privatisation. It would still be chronically underfunded. Those of us working in it would still be enduring an age of pay restraint which has lasted longer than World War II. So, there's going to be a national demonstration. 4th of March in London. Facebook event in the description box below. Bring your banners, spread the word, and let's show this unelected Prime Minister and a tiny majority of 12 MPs exactly what they can do with their privatisation agenda. Share, subscribe, see you later.
Yeah, so, no, it's all's not lost yet. It sounds dreadful, but we've got on our side the fact that the public love the NHS. There's been oodles of, like, protests and NHS campaign groups set up, and there's loads of evidence out there to prove something needs to change. There's also loads of evidence to prove what needs to change and how it needs to change. It's just about making our voices heard. Really do what that young woman said. Get out there, campaign, set up campaign groups, write to your local councillors and share the information. Share this video, subscribe to this channel. Just get out there, talk to your friends, talk to your family, do whatever you can, and just with the faith to fight for it, as Nye Bevan said, because I do believe it will work. It's a long haul, but I believe we can get there. So we do need to awaken the public to the fact our NHS is being eroded, but we don't need to scare the life out of them. We need to tell them that it can get better. We need to point out to them that it's really quite simple. A publicly run NHS, as we first had, is what would be most efficient. There is no justification for doing what they're doing now. And NHS policy has got to be open and transparent. And it's got to have adequate funding. But funding isn't everything. They've got to have the right policies. And you've got to be... The government's got to be accountable. There's got to be somebody accountable when things go wrong. And need matters. Services should be provided if the need is there. Not just if the marketplace says it should be there. Any campaign to reduce poverty or tackle social issues will indirectly assist the NHS. No more cuts, no more closures of hospitals, and no to any more privatisation. Just keep saying it and say it to everybody. We have on our side the fact that the public from all political persuasions love the NHS. It's time to get angry and make our voices heard. Yeah, here's just a list of a few of the places where I got information towards putting this presentation together. Thanks for watching. Please share and please subscribe to the channel. And have a look at your own People's Assembly wherever you are. Come along if you're in Eastbourne. Come along Wednesday nights to Christchurch. We'll start again after Easter, 7 till 9 p.m. Christchurch in Seaside, that is. It'd be great to see you. Thanks a lot.